All right, let's begin in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. Ephesians 6, verse 4, as we think about the education of children and emphasizing the Bible giving parents the directive and the charge to care for their children. And that would involve every aspect of their life primarily. So let's look at Ephesians 6, verse 4. Who'll read that for us? Paul?
And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord.
Okay. So it's placed on the fathers here. Of course, mothers have a role to play as well, but it's put squarely on the shoulders of the fathers to bring them up, and it gives a specific application, the training and admonition of the Lord. So the primary thing is to teach them about God, about God's will, about serving God, honoring God, and things like that. But we know that a father's care for his children doesn't stop there. Can you think of another passage that would address the father's responsibility toward his children? Is there any other area that he's responsible for, Zach?
Ephesians 6, 1 through 4. I'm sorry if I missed the earlier part of the question.
Okay, we just read Ephesians 6, 4. So and earlier to that, children obey your parents. So that implies the mother and the father both have a role in raising the children, teaching them and training them, which to your point there with obeying the parents, that has to do with more than just spiritual training, spiritual teaching.
Hebrews 12:7. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? So from that passage you see that God chastens those who he loves. And that's the reciprocal relationship between the father and his sons. He's going to discipline the son because he loves him and train him the way that he should go.
Okay, so just like Paul does in Ephesians chapter 5, he takes a known marriage and the relationship between husband and wife to illustrate the relationship of Christ and the church, and the Hebrew writer takes the known or the given relationship between a father and a child and what you understand in the nature of that and the teaching, the discipline of that child, and says the Father in heaven is like that toward his children on earth. Clint just mentioned something there. Proverbs 22, verse 6. Proverbs 22, verse 6. Let's read that. Somebody may actually have it memorized, but Proverbs 22, 6. Carter?
Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it.
Okay. So you start them off, you train them up in the way they should go. You teach them how to be good people, decent citizens, things like that. When they're old, they won't depart. The Proverbs are truisms. And there are children who do depart, who go away, who turn from the Lord, who don't come back. We understand that. But one of the things that's teaching there is something that was mentioned in the textbook about a guy by the name, I think it was Francis Xavier. Do you remember what he said about children and getting them early on? What is that idea, that concept, Mike?
I always heard 5 years, but it's 7 years. But give me a child until they're 5 years old, and I'll make them Catholic forever.
Right.
I've always heard that it's a little different.
Right. And if memory serves me, Hitler certainly believed in that because he believed in getting the youth and indoctrinating them young. And it's just the point of the earlier you begin to teach them, to train them, to shape their minds, their views, their opinions, their ideas, the more likely that is going to mold them for life. Because as they're young, they're pliable. And as we get older, just the reality is we get more set in our ways. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if we're set like this is teaching. If you've been taught young things that are right and good and true, and it doesn't discount us examining ourselves as we go along and making adjustments or changes where they're needed. But the idea is you get them while they're young, and when they're older, they're going to be set on that right path. So parents have that duty and that responsibility. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. Let's read these here. Proverbs 1, 8 and 9. Who's got that? Mike.
Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Indeed, they are a graceful wreath to your head and ornaments about your neck.
Okay, so we point out there's a responsibility that falls upon the father, the parents, responsible, things like that. What is this telling us here? Of course, who's this directed to? Who's he saying? Verse 8. My son. So a child. And he's telling the child to listen to him for what purpose?
Instructions
Okay, instructions.
for life.
Say that again.
For life.
Okay, for life. Any other way to put that? To describe that?
The law.
He puts it in poetic language here when he says graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. He's not saying if you listen to your parents, you're going to have nice jewelry. What's he really saying?
The teachings that you inherit and learn from your parents, then you'll be able to essentially wear them. They'll always be with you, and they will guide you.
Okay. And what's the purpose of that? As you go through the book of Proverbs, we don't have time to go through all this, but what is it that he's telling his son through Proverbs, especially the first 10 chapters? But
I think he's telling him the pitfalls that he needs to try to avoid, and he's probably speaking from a mindset of experience, not just of himself, but other things that he's seen in life. And these are snares that catch an awful lot of people.
okay, parents are given to children, and we don't often think about that, but parents are given to children to help them to avoid dangers, pitfalls, troubles, sorrows, heartaches, mistakes in life. When God established the family, he brought Adam and Eve together and he told them to be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth. He put the family unit together because it was mutually beneficial for everyone in that family unit. And so just as much as children are given to parents, parents are given to children in God's design of things, and it's to help them in life learn from that wisdom, that experience that the parents have to be a blessing in the life of the children. Something you think about, or I thought about, in looking at this lesson, he talks a lot about the humanists and their viewpoint of educating children. We'll touch on that in just a minute. But there is no provision in the Bible for anyone other than the parents. There's no putting upon people outside of that family unit to take on or be the primary people who are going to teach and train the children. There's no provision either in the Bible or the U.S. Constitution that says the state should educate children. It's just not there. There's nothing in the Bible that says the church should raise the children. It's the family unit that is given, primarily the parents. Now, that's not to say the parents can't take advantage of different opportunities for their children to be educated and say, hey, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, or here's an opportunity, or here's something you need to do to get an education in X, Y, or Z, secular education or otherwise. So not saying that it's not, that it lies solely with the parents. You have to teach them math and chemistry and physiology and biology, and not saying that. Saying it falls to the parents. They're the ones in charge of taking care of it. And it's not somebody else's duty to do that for you. But today, as the lesson pointed out, the state is trying to take over the role of the parent and have the authority in decision making. I don't know, it's been a while since my kids have been in grade school, public school, elementary school, both of them there. Hannah went all the way through in public schools. Elijah went through the fourth grade. And things were getting worse and worse and worse. But I know that there was a point, even when Hannah was very young, that the public school system said you have to make an appointment before you can come to this school, and you have to have permission to come in and see your child. And I instantly was like, no, that doesn't work. If I want to see my child, I'm going to see my child. That's what, because it's my child. It's not yours. But they really think it's their child. And you've probably seen news reports say they really truly think that you as a parent don't have the rights, that they have the rights, and they know because they've received this education in how to educate children. Well, just look at the news and tell me whether that's working out or not. So the Bible says, moms and dads, mothers, fathers, you are the one who's responsible to make sure of their education, their raising, which education is really the raising of your children. And it spans beyond just math and reading and all those kinds of things. But concerns with the modern education system, one of the things is question number 2 in the workbook, what parental roles are being filled by schools? So we kind of touched on that, but do you have some specifics that you see? What are they doing now? Zach?
I don't know what it's called, if it's the same thing or not, but the SHARE program, so not directly involved with the curriculum that the school might offer, but sexual health and responsibility education, teaching children about things that the school has a right to do, really. So the parent's obligation to, at the timing, at the choosing, the time they choose and in the way they choose to educate their children on things that are of a sexual nature.
The school deciding when to do that?
What I'm saying is the schools do decide to do that.
Yes.
And that's not the role that they should be playing in replacement of the parents. So that's one thing that comes to mind.
Right. And in a later lesson, it touches on that idea. It goes more into depth about that issue of sex education for children and how schools have gone terribly awry in that. Other areas, Anita?
I think it's called here locally the backpack program. When the kids are out for school in the summer, I mean, they're providing meals instead of the parents providing meals for them and stuff like that too. Kind of extended past providing, breakfast, lunch and stuff like that at school, they're even going when they're not in school. That's
So what has that become? A crutch for the parents. It's basically year-round daycare. State-funded year-round daycare type operations and programs. Mike?
I would say just morals in general, because teachers and such, I mean, they're given dual role. I know it's a little, but they're given a dual role of not only being an educator, but also taking point, because we've moved in that direction, now the homes are actually starting to feel that pain and reciprocating in that, the schools are starting to feel that pain.
Well, let's qualify this. Not all teachers are thrilled about the way the system is now. And there are those who do their very best under the circumstances that are there. And when we're talking about these things, we're talking about the system. We're talking about these people who have led an agenda over decades to transform public school education from what we would consider to be the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, things like that. It transformed it from that to the raising of children across the board they have to deal with discipline issues. They have to deal with the feeding of them, not just making sure there's a school lunch or they're taking care, but breakfast, lunch, and dinner being served at school. When I was a kid, there was never breakfast served. I don't ever remember any of that. There was lunch and that was it. But it was out of necessity because you were there during the day. We knew of teachers in Kentucky, one in particular, she was in elementary, but they were required to do home visits for their students. They had to go to the home, they had to go in the home, they had to talk to the parent or parents and see what that environment was like. Okay, I get it. Some parents are bums. I get that. But I don't ever want a teacher coming in my home, checking me out. It's like a social worker coming in. Well, are you worthy to be a parent? Is this environment okay for your children? One day it's going to come to the point with that kind of thing is they see a Bible on the table. Oh, they're indoctrinating their kids. You need to take them away from them. It's going to happen. There are other things that they have decided that, children shouldn't be in a home. They pull, and this is the school system that's behind it. That system being in place in certain areas in our country. So there's the feeding, there's the discipline of children. You have to discipline them, which it used to be, if you didn't do exactly what the teacher said, the vice principal was going to teach you a serious lesson. And then when you got home, you got that second lesson. But now the teachers, their hands are tied and all those things, but they're expected to do that. They're clothing children, all those kinds of things. So question number 3 is, according to John Dewey, what is the primary goal of the educational system? John Dewey, early 1900s, I think it was. Do you remember what the lesson said was the primary role that he saw of the education system?
Push society along, to progress society.
Okay, yeah, and really to reconstruct it. That he was a humanist. He didn't like Christianity. And so he could see if we get control of the public education system, we start teaching these children from like 5 and 6 years old and up until they're 18, we can completely transform society. And that's what they've done. They've transformed society and taking over the education system. So humanists see the public education as a vital indoctrination tool. Teachers are to be evangelists, as the lesson noted in there, the Humanist Manifesto, 1 or 2, I forget which one it is, but they have to see themselves as proselytizers of the faith, and that's the faith of humanism, is what they're looking at. And so there's various topics that they push and are key to them. One of them, of course, is evolution. And why do you think evolution is so dominant in their thought process and their education process?
Strips God out of creation, out of the world, out of everything.
Okay, so it strips God out of that and says there is no God. It's all a naturalistic explanation.
Once you've stripped it out, then there's a hole. Now essentially there's a vacuum. You have to fill it with something. And they did their best.
Okay, Mike?
I think what we see throughout the seems to be further and further away from God till finally the whole society had. The flood happens. You've got the nation of Israel, who started off, it looked like pretty strong. And all of a sudden, society continues, and it just seems as if God has to put something in place, whether it be devastation, destruction, or something, to kind of start over. But it always kind of goes back to, let's move further and further away from God.
Yeah, the tower. I mean, right after the flood, you get right to the tower. That's a humanist activity that's going on there. We are greater than God. We can reach God. We can be on level with God. Phil?
Evolution creates a power vacuum. But without God on top, that allows the government to just slide out.
Exactly. The state becomes the God in place of that. And one of the key things they use is dinosaurs. Why do they use dinosaurs? When we're talking about getting children young, why do they use dinosaurs? Because they're cool. Right? So it's fascinating. You know, these big lizards with teeth and long tails and, you know, just giants. It's really fascinating. And that grabs their imagination. Then they begin to hammer away. Well, it was, you know, 45 million years ago, 100 million years ago. And they don't say there is no God. They don't say necessarily there is this evolution and teach all those details about all that. But they just hammer away at dinosaurs. They're just reinforcing this idea that this old earth, that there is this long time frame of millions of years. I mean, the children's cartoons, I remember, you know, when Hannah was little, Land Before Time, you know, just constantly hammering away millions of years and millions of years and millions of years. And that's just part of that evolutionary time frame. And one of the problems we face as Christians is there are brethren who are compromisers who bought into the idea of theistic evolution, which is a lie, it's error, and it's sin. But there are prominent, influential preachers that have bought into it, and they want to say that there is a way to reconcile Darwinian evolution, naturalistic things, with a creator. And you can't mix the two, and we don't have time to dig into all that, but it's a problem. There's attacks, of course, in the schools on morality, attacks on religion, various things like that. But let's press on to Deuteronomy chapter 6. I want to jump to Deuteronomy 6. Thinking about the education of our children. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, let's read here verses 1 through 9. I want you to think about this not just from an individual or family unit perspective, but think about who's saying this, who he's speaking to, and why. So, Deuteronomy 6, verses 1 through 9. Who will read that? Philip.
Now this is the commandment, and these are the statutes and judgments which the Lord your God has commanded to teach you, that you may observe them in the land which you are crossing over to possess, that you may fear the Lord your God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you, you and your son and your grandson, all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. Therefore hear, O Israel, and be careful to observe it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly as the Lord God of your fathers has promised you, a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
Okay. So, of course, who's speaking? Moses, and he's speaking to? Yeah, to Israel, the nation because they're getting ready to go into the land of Canaan. And what's his concern when they go into that land? What's that? There is that concern. What does he state here? Verse 2, command you and your sons and your grandsons, all the days of your life, that what? Your days can be prolonged. He's not talking about them individually, well, so you can live to 95, 100, 105, 110. What's he talking about? The nation would survive, that it would thrive, that they would prosper in that land. And notice that as he's talking about this, he says that you have to keep the commands, but one of the keys to that is teaching your children, educating them properly, getting them to understand the right from the wrong, to respect God, to respect God's will, and all those things that come from law. Remember in Deuteronomy chapter 5, he had just reviewed the 10 Commandments, which is the framework of all the law. And so he comes right into, you need to keep these things, your days be prolonged, and you need to teach them to your children. Because that's how you're going to perpetuate the nation, how you're going to get it to move forward and to continue to do well down through the centuries, through the generations that are yet to come. So he tells them to love the Lord your God in verse 5 with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your soul. So what's the idea of loving the Lord with all your heart in this context here? Why would he break it down heart, soul, and strength?
The heart is you want to. You want to do what he says.
Okay. You want to do what he says? Anything else to the heart? We just had a big holiday about it. Mike?
Yeah, I was thinking about love, and then also the idea, Paul's point with the will, everything that you have inside of you, your thoughts, everything that comes from that.
Clint?
The heart is one of the most important organs in your body, right? You don't have a working heart, and everything else falls apart. Same thing with God and your relationship with Him. If you are good with God, other things will be blessed and benefit. If they're not, then the deterioration begins.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been at work and either you or somebody else that you thought of or somebody said to you or you said to them, my heart's just not in it. But you're doing the job. You're making the widgets, you're cleaning this, you're doing that, putting this together, whatever it is. What do we mean by your heart is not in it? What's that?
No commitment.
No commitment. You don't care. You're just going through the motions. And here he's talking about you need to have the affection, the emotion, the buy-in. You do care. You do love God. And so with all your heart, the intellect, the emotion, with all your soul, your consciousness, your person, your being, who you truly are, with all your strength, what would it be with all your strength?
It's your desire and your effort. What you put into it is what you're going to get out of it.
Okay. If your heart is that emotional, intellectual side, your soul is, your soul, who you are, your strength would be directly related to what? Clint was talking about it, but your body. Your body's devoted to God. Your strength, you put forth that effort, the action that you take is there. So he says, love the Lord your God in this way. And so you do that, he says, and these words need to be in your heart to guide that, and you shall teach your children. So if you love the Lord your God, you teach your children. And that concept right there of you shall teach them diligently is literally the idea of sharpen them, to sharpen your children. It comes from a Hebrew word that means to whet, sharpen, or to prick. And to whet is the idea, you know, you have a sharpening stone, you whet the sharpening stone, and you sharpen the knife, the blade, the axe, or whatever it may be. But that's the concept here. Can you think of a passage in the Bible that talks about being sharpened?
Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another.
Okay.
Proverbs 27:17.
Yep, exactly right. So he's saying you sharpen your children. Why would you need to sharpen your children? Psalm 127. Psalm 127. Now, there's some of us who can look at this, and as we think about it, we may look at it and think, well, I sharpened mine, or I need to sharpen mine, or I wish I had sharpened mine some more. But Psalm 127, let's read verses 3 through 5. 3 through 5. Elijah?
Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate.
Okay. So, what are your children like? Arrows in the hand of a warrior. What's he mean by that, and how does that relate to sharpening your children? Carrie?
Well, in a sense, we're all in a battle, so to speak, with Satan, and sharpening our children prepares them for what the different things that they'll be coming up against.
Okay. Preparing them for things they'll come against. Clint?
Like it or not, you have to send them out into the world. And just like an arrow is sent from a bow, if they're not sharp, then they'll be dull in many senses of that word. But if they're not prepared to help people, to be humble, to serve God, then they're going to fall by the wayside. They're going to become the prodigal, living type person.
I guess I always took it slightly different, and that is whatever you aim them at, that's what they're going towards. Especially when you pull that bow back and you let it go, they're going towards that target. So be careful with the target you aim towards.
You want to be careful of that. It's true. What are arrows used for? When it says in the hands of a warrior. It's in warfare. We're in a spiritual warfare, and one of the things the Bible's indicating is our children are a part of that, and we need to sharpen them, and they are effective as we send them out into the world for advancing the cause of Christ and making advances on the enemy. That's a part of it. And it's not the idea that we're using them, but you think about, you pass on the faith from one generation to the next. How's that going to happen? Yes, we want to evangelize, we want to teach people, but don't we want to teach our own? And have them going forward and going out into the fight, as Clint said, they're going out into the world. It's going to happen at some point. They're going to be out there. They're going to stand on their own 2 feet, and they've got to be ready for that. And we need to send them out and see them as they're a part of the way that we help to push forward the cause of Christ down into that next generation. And as you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, in the overall context, that's part of what Moses is talking about. This is a generational thing. That's why he's saying, teach your children. I'm talking to you, your sons, and your grandsons. It's going to go on and on and on. And so you need to sharpen them so that they go forward effectively serving God, and it perpetuates that nation. And that's how that nation is going to be strong, how it's going to be prosperous, how it's going to be stable. All right, any other thoughts there? Mike?
Just as a closing thought, the one piece of advice that I gave, or that I was given from my uncle whenever Tanner was first born, is that the most important thing that you have going on in your life now is to make sure your children and you spend eternity together. And I always kind of took that to heart, you know, to make sure that, you know, I looked at the scriptures whenever I was having trouble with some of the parenting issues that you have along the way and stuff like that. But, you know, so keep that as your focus as well, and, you know, give them a shot at, you know, eternity.
More important than a secular education for a job is you want them in heaven. Exactly right. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 18. Genesis chapter 18. And what I want us to see is we have a very real, very serious battle and difficulty because the pressures of society are against us. But that's not anything new. It's always been there. In Genesis chapter 18, verse 19, if I could get somebody to read that for us, please. This is God speaking concerning Abraham. 18:19. Go, Paul.
For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteously and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him.
Okay. So you think about what God is saying regarding Abraham here and how it applies to the fact that he's a man who is going to lead his children properly in his home. Now that would involve an education for his children, teaching them properly. So think about this. It says he's going to command his children. He's going to be in charge as the father of that home. He is going to direct the activities and the things that are done. One of the things that are done, in fact, the previous chapter, Genesis chapter 17, he's already proven when God told him to circumcise all the males in his household, what did he do? He went and circumcised them all. Right? When Isaac was born later, he circumcises him according to God's commandment. So that's an action that he took. It says he's going to teach his family to keep the way of the Lord. So there's a higher authority in life. It's not Abraham. It's Abraham serving the Lord, teaching his family to serve the Lord, the higher authority. I, as a father, am not doing this arbitrarily because this is what I want. I'm doing it because I have a master in heaven. I have a father in heaven who's telling me this is what needs to be done. So teaching that higher authority. When he got a bride for Isaac, you go and you read that in Genesis 24, and one of the things you see there is that Abraham is very concerned about his son marrying a woman who would help him remain faithful to God. And so he arranges all those things so that that happens. To do righteousness and justice, to be right and just before God. Hebrews 11, verse 20. Let's jump to Hebrews 11, verse 20. I want you to think about this for a minute. Hebrews 11, verse 20. So Hebrews 11 talks about Abraham being a man of faith. Then Hebrews 11, verse 20. And, well, let's read 20 and 21. Who will get 20 and 21 for us? Micah.
By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. faith Jacob when he was dying, lest each of the sons of Joseph and worship leaning on the top of his staff.
Okay. So these three are usually put together, right, when we talk about them. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. All of them listed in Hebrews 11. Anything strike you about that? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but in biblical history, there's very, very few father-son pairs that are both faithful to God. Who took over Moses' place? Joshua. Wasn't Moses' son? Who took over Eli's place? Samuel. Wasn't his sons? Samuel's sons ended up not being good. And that's not to say anything necessarily against those men and they're raising their children. I'm just saying it's very, very rare that you see a father and a son who are both faithful and committed to the Lord. But you look at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What does that tell you about Abraham? His son and his grandson. Two of the greatest men ever, and were recipients of the promises of God, not just because of Abraham. Yes, it was Abraham who set it in motion as a faithful man of God, but they were faithful men of God in their own right. And that doesn't happen by accident. Clint?
To further your thought on Eli, he was condemned because he did not restrain his sons, and then they were eventually put to death because of that. And so he died because of that too.
Yes.
That was a pretty serious offense that the Lord took upon Eli for his neglect.
Because he didn't do what God would have him to do.
You know, while we're here in Hebrews 11, having just come from Genesis 18, in Hebrews 11, verse 10, it's where it says that Abraham was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. That idea of that heavenly country. In Genesis 18, it says that so that Abraham would receive what was promised. Ultimately, that's heaven. How did he receive that promise? By teaching his children to be faithful. And that's not the only condition of receiving that promise, but it's one of them as a parent. If you don't do that, you can forget about the promise.
Right. Exactly right. Let's go to Acts 7. Acts 7. In Acts 7, let's read verses 21 and 22. Acts 7, 21 and 22. Who will get that? Clint?
And when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and deeds.
Hey, tell me about Moses there. What's that saying to us?
He was raised in an Egyptian, and he was mighty in that, and he succeeded in that.
Okay, what's another way to put that?
He was adopted.
He was adopted. What's another way to put, particularly verse 22?
Learned in all the wisdom.
Another way to put it.
Indoctrinated.
Any other way? Educated? He had a secular education, second to none. Right, being adopted as Pharaoh's daughter's son. I mean, for us, it would be, at least back in the day, it'd be like some wealthy person adopted a child and they went to Yale or Princeton or Harvard. And and not just that, but they had private tutors from those institutions. The greatest minds on earth are the ones who educated them, and they excelled at it. Highly educated. But what do we know about Moses? Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verses 23 to 27. In Hebrews 11, 23 to 27. Who'll get that? Zach, go.
By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible.
Okay. So, how is it that Moses, with this secular education, made these decisions in his life to suffer with the people of God? Carrie?
His mother was brought in to take care of him, and we can only assume that she taught him his growing up.
Who is it that had him while he was very young? His own mother. And so, I'm personally a big homeschool advocate. There's no way on earth I would let my kids go through the public school system today. Not going to happen. But if you do that, if your choice is, hey, they're going to go out there, K through 12, that's your choice. Here's where I look and say, okay, that can be done. Somebody can teach their children, ground them, stay on top of things. They can know what's going on. They can teach their children and get them through. And the home education triumph over the secular education. That can be done. Here, that's what happened with Moses, and he turned out to be a godly and righteous man, a man who spoke with God as a friend, face to face, very similar to Abraham. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, it shows that even at a fairly young age, circumstances start to have less and less of an effect on how a person turns out. If they are taught right very young, people really don't have much of an excuse for the way they turn out if everyone around them is a particular way.
Right, and like when young people go off away from home, maybe go off to school or they take a job somewhere else, they've been raised right. They know right from wrong. They understand that. They're equipped to make decisions, and maybe they still need some guidance along the way, but you're exactly right. Those circumstances really are less and less of an excuse over time as to decisions they make and things they do. Well, we don't have time, but Timothy is another great example of where the father was actually a hindrance, but the mother and the grandmother helped to raise him, to teach him the right way. So, in spite of the challenges we see in education, we can raise godly children in this world. All right, thank y'all. Lesson 11 next week.